One of the things I thoroughly enjoy doing in our school community is bringing you outside voices with outside stories. One of our returning guests, and actually a member of the Vegas event for the third year in a row, is going to be Simon, the uneducated economist. How you doing, Simon?
I'm doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me on this morning.
Thank you for saying yes. I always appreciate your words of wisdom. I watch your content, and we're going to just drill in, folks. Always remember, this is for you, right? I have the opportunity to speak with Simon whenever I need him, whenever I have a question, but you guys don't have his cell number. So why don't you use this opportunity to ask questions, put it in the comments, raise your hands, all of that good stuff. But Simon, we're going to start with one of your recent videos. And the title of that video was 80% are doomed. Tell me more. What is it? What are you thinking? Why are 80% of folks doomed?
80% are doomed. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, scary title. It's funny how I love the YouTube algorithm, and if you put some nice triggering titles up there, you can really get some notice off of it. But the scary part is that there's a lot of truth behind this statement that 80% are doomed going into the future. And really, when I go and I think about some of the things that are taking place, I'm looking for evidence of things like the Cantillon effect. And so when I see the separation between the rich and the poor and how this has taken place, I look at things like paycheck to paycheck and how
Mhm.
many percentage of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and then which direction is this moving? How many people are actually consumers within this economy? And the more you start to break this down, you're finding that there is evidence that there is a top 20% and a bottom 80%. The
Hmm.
bottom 80% is going to have a far more difficult time going into the future as opposed to the top 20%, which are going to be doing ever increasing amounts of more of the consumption. So, as we see this going into the future, a timeline of somewhere around 25 to 30 years is when I'm guessing from the numbers that I have been seeing on when we could expect that 80% of the people simply will not have a paycheck or the
Hmm.
ability to save in a way that would give them the ability to buy into the assets, buy homes, buy into the retirement funds like we have always expected as Americans to get from our full-time jobs.
Wow. So again, this is something you're seeing coming in the next, I'll call it 2 to 3 decades, 20, 30 years, which is interesting because when I hear these scary headlines, and you're absolutely right, the YouTube algorithm is geared. Or actually, I don't know that it's the algorithm. Let me take that back. It's the human condition, right? The human condition likes negativity and fear, and it's fight or flight. So scary headlines like 80% are doomed are gonna get clicks because it feeds the person. But I'm here to kind of find a community, build a community of wealth builders. And when I look at 80% are doomed, or I hear the middle class is shrinking, I always step back and I do two things. One, like you just said, like, okay, 80% are doomed, but what was it last decade? What was it the decade before? Right? Because we can always throw out these big, scary numbers, but you know what? If the last decade, 76% of people were doomed and now it's 80, it's not as scary, right? Because we have the trend line. But more importantly, what I ask myself and I try to bring to my community is okay, great. Let's just assume these are true. That means that there are 20% of us that are winners. So, how do we do that? Right? When we think about the middle class is shrinking, it is, but more people are moving up than moving down, which nobody ever tells you. So when I step back and look at this, and I look at what you've done over the last 4 or 5 years, you know, the ability to build wealth, frankly, has never been easier. And I don't think people really understand that, right? There's so many more ways to produce income. The magic of living below your means has never been truer. Create some disposable income, buy assets, and hold on for a decade. The principles of wealth building have never been simpler, never been easier. But why do people just not do it, you think?
I couldn't agree with you more, Mike. I am clear evidence that this can take place. I have no college education. I have no business in finance. I have no family wealth. I have nothing like that going on in my life. I got I barely graduated high school. I work at a lumber yard, right? But yet here I am in one of the most expensive places in the entire nation, buying a house, building up assets, living
Yeah.
out the American dream with a wife and a family and the kids and all the other stuff. And yet here it is, people are saying you can't do it. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can.
Over here.
And it was just like, it was just like, okay, so while everybody else, 80% of the people saying you can't do it, there's 20% of the people who are saying they can. Right. And those 20% of the people aren't necessarily 20% of the top household incomes either. You
No.
have to really think about it. It's somewhere in between there. There's a little window of opportunity between the people who simply are never going to be able to live below their means, and there's another spot in which that the income is providing you with enough to have that good standard of living, and then there's this window of opportunity in between there, right, where you can lower your standard of living or you can raise your income and you can make this happen. So I know somebody who was making, I don't know, $50,000 a year, and they lived incredibly cheap. They didn't have a place to like a residence to go to, and they were able to save like $20,000 that year or something like that because of the way that they were actually functioning and considering what it is that I've known from other people who have earned more than $100,000 a year and couldn't save any of it. Living paycheck to paycheck is really a very relative thing on how it is that you conduct yourself, because you save money at $50,000 or be completely in debt at $100,000.
Yeah.
Where is it that you stand, right? And so I totally agree that if you keep your living expenses low, I mean, I'm sitting in a 99 Ford Explorer right now, and I have a 97 Suburban. Those are my vehicles because driving a brand new vehicle is quite expensive. And I
Hmm.
could be taking that money and be really, luxurious experience of having this car. But instead, I like to buy into assets. I like to buy into the stock market. I like to buy into fixing up the house. I like to buy things that I know are going to be helpful and useful to me in the future, and having a car that is fancy or nice so that I can carry a status or something doesn't really seem that appealing to my future. It's like, that's just the kind of the way I see it. So everybody has to kind of take it on for themselves on what it is that they're going to be when it comes to where we are in this economy now. Your day job isn't enough. Just face it, right? It's not going to be. I don't care how much money you make. You can make, a zillion dollars an hour. Don't get me wrong, you make it up, right? But what I'm getting at. You make $50 an hour. Seems like a lot of money, but really, it's only for 8 hours. That's as much money as you could ever possibly make. And if you live up to that standard, that's all you're going to get. So you have to cut back on your standard of living in order to have any kind of, existence that's going to be beyond that of what your paycheck can provide you. All right. So knowing in this day and age how many opportunities, so many different places, so many side hustles, so like much internet access to a flow of cash that may not seem that significant, but being in the flow is an energy that then is manifesting into a multiplying effect, right? So,
Yeah.
like, it doesn't matter if you're going for a dollar. If you go for a dollar, you can go for $2 and then $4 and $8, and then pretty soon you got some money rolling in, and never really thinking about how much you were making, just knowing that you could be in it, right? And so when you start figuring out ways that you can make money on the internet that are essentially, passive in a sense, where you just do a little bit of work and then it generates money, whether it's online sales or a YouTube video or something of that nature, now all of a sudden you have an advantage over everybody who is trying to figure out how to make their job make it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where, again, you land in the 20%. This is the 20% of the people who are going to make it, 80% of the people won't.
No, this is an important concept because, I always, I believe that the system we are in rewards effort, focus, discipline, sacrifice, hard work. And today we seem to have a lot of folks that just want to complain, right? For those of us using social media to produce these streams of income that you highlighted, there's also people that use, social media to consume poison. You and I live in a world where there are doomers and crash bros, right? And you know the stats. One of the reasons negative headlines work and they lean into them and they've been wrong for 5 years, but who cares? Is that people just they click on that stuff and they're just constantly feeding themselves poison. So again, where I go to this in our community is if you guys want to be part of the 20%. I don't think there's anybody watching me that doesn't want to be in the 20%. I think a lot of people watching me aren't in the 20% yet, but they want to be there. And if you want to be there and you're focused and you're disciplined, you can get there. One of the things I love about your story is frankly, you shouldn't be here, right? People don't know your story, right? You were, barely graduated high school. You drank a lot. You just like you were not set up to be the uneducated economist with, 6-figure subscribers and, loyal followings and passion and all of that stuff. But your future, right? Your past doesn't dictate your future. And
That's
you
right.
can make a fucking decision and be committed, and life is different. And that's what I don't get
Yeah.
about these freaking doomers, man.
Well, it's a survival instinct, right? You're scared, and you're looking for evidence of the collapse, the failure, the danger, so that you can somehow protect yourself from it, and you feel good about this idea. And the more that you do the research and discover it and see things beyond that of what it is that other people are seeing out there, the more comforting this doomsday information starts to become for you, because it becomes like the security blanket. The more you know, the better you feel about it.
Mm,
Now, here's the unfortunate consequence from studying doomsday scenario stuff, is that it doesn't give you the opportunity to study things that are going to provide you with the flow of cash and abundance that is going to be in ever presence everywhere around you. Because instead, what you are going to see is evidence of all the failure, all the new world order taking over, all the stuff that says, hey man, I can't make it in this world. And because of that, you will find evidence of it everywhere you look, because the ego wants to be right, and the ego wants to be safe, and the ego will put up walls to then block out everything that will change what it is that you are seeing and viewing out there. And this is a generally one of the reasons why I was drinking a lot too, right? And so this leads into the depressionary effects that come from it. When you start giving that up, when you just give it up, like let it go, right? And it's just like, okay, just let it go, and then figure out how to make some money on the internet. And then realize that if you are stoned and drunk, you got the brakes on,
yeah.
right? Like, how are you supposed to be like moving forward if you got the brakes on? Like
Yeah.
you're sitting there studying, I'm gonna study how to make money, messed up. It ain't gonna work, I mean, maybe, yeah, for some people it might work, but for me it didn't work, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, understanding that, like, you got to make the next right decision. And generally, the next right decision is not focusing in on negativity and the world around you being negative and hurtful and hateful and depressing and all that other stuff that goes with it. You got to find like-minded individuals who are on the side of, no, look at us, we are making it, we can do it, we got,
Mhm.
options and opportunities and abundance, and everything is just here for us for taking if we just go out there and just learn how to do it.
Yeah.
Now you got a whole different mindset and a different attitude, and it starts coming to you. You start building the network and building the business and building the relationships up, and everything takes time, right? It took you time to deteriorate your life into failure and building up that debt. Of course, it can happen quite quickly, but it took time to do that. It takes time to get out of it, and it takes a brick by brick kind of attitude that every little
Yeah.
piece is coming together.
Yeah. Well, you just said something that is a core tenet of my belief and why I'm so passionate about this school community is it's that like-minded, right? Again, there's the old saying, show me your 5 friends and I'll show you your future. You want to be healthy, get around 5 fit people. You want to be a millionaire, get around 5 millionaires. And that's why I'm now calling, our community kind of like a wealth club, right? Each one of us are everyday wealth builders, but our community is this wealth club. Because again, we're all going the same direction. We're going at different rates. We are at different points, but we are all going the same direction. We have almost 500 people building wealth every day. asking questions, interacting, networking, taking the, we give them free education and all this other stuff. We have 9 accountability groups. We have an accountability group, Simon, every freaking day of the week, right? And I can't stress enough getting around the right people. And, as adults, I learned one of my big takeaways from the Bigger Pockets event when I gave my speeches, making new friends as an adult is hard, right? Because you don't have that circle,
Oh man.
right? When you were building wealth, I'm guessing your 5 buddies, right? Your 5 friends at the lumber yard, they're not building wealth the same way. So you have to go find them. So just talk about getting in the right communities because that's such a big deal.
Yeah. And you're so true about that. I mean, being around the people that, you want to be like, or essentially Emily, to essentially take on something, because to me everything is now relating down to energy. Like I think about the energy of being in some, like
Yes.
being in that feeling of conversation, of networking, of meeting people, of talking.
That
There's all
vortex, that
kinds.
just energy vortex. Yes.
Exactly. And so, like, for me, for example, like, I had to really ask myself as things were taking off and going places, and all these people were like, like, and I'm like, oh crap, look at all this going on, right? Because it
Yeah.
happened quite suddenly for me. Is I had to really ask myself, man, what is it that you were really looking for in the beginning, right? As this
Mm-hmm.
was happening and it was taking off and it was growing, what was it that you were really feeling and thinking about at the time? Like, what was it
Yeah.
that you were looking for? Because that did something. It had an energy behind it that grew fast, right? And so I had to ask myself, man, the one thing that I was really wanting in my life at that time when I started this, and I could really be honest when I say this, is I just wanted to be able to pay my bills on time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted. Like I couldn't do it. I had so, like, I was looking at my family and I was looking at everything going on and it was deteriorating. And I thought to myself, damn it, man, if I could just get that, like everything else would just be just awesome if I could just get that done.
Yeah.
And I tell you, having that in my life has just made everything else just something like a bonus.
Yeah. That's
All
awesome.
the trips, all the, speaking engagements, all the other things that came along with it, all the money that, I was able to pay the debts and buy the house and all the other stuff. I mean, they're all awesome, but that feeling of relief, the knowing that I could just, like, if a bill shows up, I can pay it. Like,
Yeah.
and
That's
that
so awesome.
that meant everything to me. And so I always try to keep that, right? To keep that,
Hmm.
like, I like making money. I like going out there and doing it and hustling and all the other stuff that goes along with it.
Yeah.
I like, doing the things. And sometimes I find myself like almost addicted to it in a
Mm.
way that it was just like, man, I'm just like, where's the next one? Where's the next way I can do this? Where's the next opportunity?
Mm.
And then I realized, you know what? You put that stuff down, man. Go out, go fishing, go
Enjoy
hang
life.
out, go do
Yeah.
something else, because that's really what you want to do, right? The money is cool, but being able to have the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want,
Amen.
holy moly, man. Now that is something that
That's awesome.
is truly awesome, right? It
Yeah.
is. It's wealth beyond my possible imagination to just, like, even if I wanted to tell work, it was just like, you know what? I'm bailing out for the next week. And it doesn't change my life one little bit to do that, right? It's just like, and I can do whatever I want with that. That
That's
right
awesome.
there means everything. Like I don't have a number in the bank account goal. Like
Yeah.
I'm building up the assets. That was a goal. I'm doing whatever I want. That was a goal. I get to eat whatever I want. That was a cool goal, right? I mean that.
I love
And
it.
so when you make it simple like that, and then you pursue it in a positive energy, then it just kind of happens, right? So that's where the vortex, like you were saying, the energy just
Yeah. I
people are
love it.
attracted to it, and everything happens that way.
I love it. Guys, again, if you're watching this and you're thinking about building wealth, we got this school community. It's 20 bucks a month, 67 pennies a day. I don't know why you wouldn't join this wealth club. Get around these 500 folks. All right, Simon, we're going to move to a new video title of yours. This one caught my attention. It was about 6 days ago you streamed this one. Housing market doomsday or gold rush? Tell me about that one.
All the crash bros out there, I just love this one. So, just like everybody out there, you try to let everything go. It doesn't really important to you, especially some comments in a YouTube video. But then, of course, you get triggered by one of them and you just gotta say something, right?
I have
So,
been triggered, yes.
um, so back to evidence of the Cantillon effect. The more I try to look for these underlying economic forces and I see them taking place within the broader economy, one of the things that I see as evidence of the abundance of money is property, right?
Yeah.
Property ownership and the rents and leases that are paid for those properties. And now, when I think about how it is that essentially the goal of wealth builders is to be in real estate. Now, I don't necessarily want it to be that way. Like, I would like it to be in like something simpler.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
that
get it.
doesn't matter what I
But it
want.
is what it is.
Like
Yeah.
it is just what it is because every single wealthy person, and I mean like all the wealthy people I've met at the other events and all the other stuff, like all of them did it with real estate,
Yeah.
right? Like every one of them. I mean, it was just like, I mean, there might have been somebody who didn't do it, but then, like, all of them did it with real estate. And so
Yeah.
you can reinvent the wheel or not, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes down to understanding that when you have an abundance of money in the system, that there's going to be a concentration of wealth that takes place from it. And the ultimate goal is property ownership.
Hmm.
This is like essentially meaning that property is going to be like the key indication of wealth,
Yeah.
right? How much property do you have or how much are you in control of? Essentially that will be the key to it. That's like the reason why it's the gold rush, right? This is where everybody's going to be moving into. It's where cash flows to. I mean, even Cantillon says industrious people will not increase their expenditures so that they can save to get a secured rate of interest beyond that of their occupation. That idea right there, right? There's really like people can do it in all kinds of stuff. They do it in stocks and dividends and bonds and all kinds of things that they do it in. But everybody who I know has done it the most magnificently has done it in real estate. Right?
Yeah.
And then to ultimately think that property ownership is the key to this, this is really why it is that most people will end up like being in a position of like, is it a doomsday? It will be a loss of opportunity, right? I mean, you think about it, if you're going into the future, and who knows what the future says, there could be changes in demographics and changes in all kinds of stuff that ends up happening, collapse of currencies that would make this, make all the stats reverse or change or do whatever, who knows? But if things are going along this continuous trajectory of the paychecks or like living paycheck to paycheck, and that is increasing more and more. If you do not have the ability to save, there's no way you're going to be a property owner,
Yeah.
right? Like it's just like there's got to be a spot inside of there where you can cut back your expenses and have at least a little bit of
Yep.
money that you can save. Because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's going to be very difficult. Now, saying you can't do it, right? I'm not like there's probably people out there who could figure it out. I'm not one of those people. What I had to figure out has to cut back on my expenses so that I could at least get a little bit of savings. And now
Hmm.
something was really interesting about saving money is that when I got that first $1,000 saved and I had it like in an investment that would actually move, it was crazy to see it move by 10%, right? And I'd be like, whoa,
Whoa.
$100. I'm like, oh my goodness, that is crazy. I didn't even have to earn that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you work really hard and you see the investments and then they grow and it's just getting bigger and bigger and you get it up to $10,000 and then, you see that 10% move and it's $1,000 and it's like,
Yeah.
holy crap, that's a
Yeah.
lot. And
Yeah.
then one day you get it up to $100,000 and something really strange happens to your feeling and understanding about investments, right? Because now you're watching a $10,000 move on this 10% move. And now it's like a huge significant number to you because it happened, especially if you're in crypto or something like I
Yeah.
am, where it can happen quite significantly and fast. it a lot of times it will give you this overwhelming feeling, right? But the
Hmm.
more that you get closer to that $100,000 mark, the more calm you end up
Yep,
feeling about the situation,
for sure.
right? And it becomes easier to actually invest and to be in that mindset and it seems to accumulate more, right?
Amen.
So it's almost like this goal to get to the 100 grand, right? Like once you're there, all these opportunities start to open up. Like you're actually looking at real estate that is a possibility to you because you have the
Hmm.
money, right?
Yep.
Now you can put the down, you can do the things, and you start looking at the world in a whole different fashion. And again, this is the energy vortex, right?
Yep. No, I love that. Folks, again, remember, we are here with Simon, the uneducated economist. You guys put in a lot of chat, so I will look for any questions there, but you can also raise your hand and ask questions if you would like. So let's see if there's any brave souls out there. Let me scroll down. We'll go bottoms up. Simon, I'm going to go and get some questions. There's somebody asking about your Suburban. Is it a 3/4 or a 1 ton? Just somebody wanted to know.
I think it's a half ton, isn't it? Yeah, it's a
Oh, it's a half.
1500.
Okay. Yeah, I
It's
didn't.
little, has nothing in it. It's just the front bench seats. It
Yeah.
actually goes quite well. It zips down the road. It's nice.
Very, very cool. Well, you know what? One thing I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, because you are the lumber god, as far as I'm concerned. What is lumber telling
Thank you.
us now?
Lumber's in shambles, man. It is a bad state of affairs when it comes to lumber right now. There has been mill curtailments, inventory depletions, and shutdowns like you wouldn't believe ripping across the
Hmm.
entire nation, including Canada. And everybody is focused in on these like tariffs that are going to be hitting lumber as if that's going to have some big impact, considering like tariffs and duties have been implemented on lumber since the 80s, right? This is nothing new to me. And
Right.
like for people to get excited about it and think, oh, God, it's like that's very much on the lesser when it comes down to demand, because the lack of demand that has taken place right now has pushed the inventory into in my opinion, a very critical state. Like
Hmm.
typically, I'm a small lumber yard, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I'm not like one of these big time home builders or dealing with big time home builders or anything like that. I'm just a small community dealing with it. But I have vendors, right? And those vendors deal with everybody.
Hmm.
And when you call up those vendors and you say, hey, I need a unit of this particular material, and they say, I'm out of stock.
Wow.
Whoa, you are? You go to the next one, they're like, yeah, I got one unit left.
Hmm.
Holy moly, this is a telling sign, right? It wasn't like they just happened to get bought out. There is a gap in
There's a trend
inventory.
you can see. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a trend that you can see. Now, ultimately, this is due to the lack of demand and that the mills really are only producing that is in demand, which is two
Hmm.
by four, 2x6 stud length and plate stock, right? So this is the typical. It's the most common lumber that you would see on a job site or anywhere else, right?
Mm.
So this is the stuff that they produce. The things that don't have as much demand, they don't produce as much of. So that wider, longer length material is less in demand than say those 2x4, 2x6 plate stocks. So now all of a sudden we have this huge price variation that has taken place between say 2x12 8 footers and a 2x12 20 footer. So just for an example, I might find where the 8 footers are selling at 450 per thousand. Okay? And this is way below even like, what would be considered the spot price, the monthly contract. And, it's thinking, wow, man, they have an abundance of these 2x12 eights. Well, yeah, it's because nobody really buys 2x12 eights. I mean, you might use them for header stock or, you may, in some areas, maybe floor joists, but there's not a huge demand for 2x12 eights. 2x12 20s, on the other hand, now there's a big demand for that. You're using it for floor joists, rafters, all kinds of places that a 2x12 20 will be used. So they're far more in demand and they're selling for like 998 per thousand,
Mm.
right? Like almost double the price. And
Interesting.
so here you have this huge price variation that's taken place within the exact same material, just different length, right?
Got it.
And now typically like in a 2x6, you can just call out a footage. You're going to say, oh man, it's going for this much a foot, and you don't have to really consider whether or not it's an 8 footer or a 20 footer. They're all the same price. Sometimes you might get a little better price on the 8 footer, right? But all the rest of them are essentially the same price. But here in this 2x12, you can't do that, right? You could sell the 8 footers for far cheaper than you can the 20 footers. Now, that to me, that is a sign of terrible inventory levels.
Got it.
right? And not being able to just call up and say, hey, I want it, that's a problem. Now, something weird on the other side of it is you can also see the same problem when we called up for a truckload of plywood and it
Mhm.
literally showed up the next day. It was like,
Got
wow, like no
it.
inventory file at all. Right.
Right.
Again,
Yep.
no demand, plenty of inventory. It's another
Mhm.
sign of the times. Right. So even though it's almost an exact opposite of what you would see, one is completely depleted and one is essentially oversupplied.
Mhm.
Because if you can deliver it the exact next day, that means there's nobody else who wanted it, right?
Right. Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah. um, and so these things are now taking place within the whole lumber industry, which to me is just like, oh my god, But to
Wow.
everybody else, they're like, whatever. But to
Well,
me, it's like a sign.
is
It's like
this
this
setting
doesn't
us up?
take place,
Yeah,
you know.
is this
And
setting
so,
us
yeah,
up for a supply chain problem? Because again, one of the how you made your name was calling the supply chain problem, years ago, quarters before anybody else saw it. It sounds like we're in a pretty bad spot, and if rates go down and suddenly new home builders switch on, which again today they're switched off, but that could change. We're gonna have we're gonna have a problem. Is that what you're telling me? If it's kind of an if question, but is that where we're headed?
that's the big what if, right? So here you got like I don't know what was the latest numbers. Maybe I don't. I haven't checked it recently,
Mhm.
but the recent home builder sentiment on buyer traffic.
It's down. It's actually baselining and coming up, but it's still terrible. It's like 31 or 32. It's horrible.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I thought it was down in the low 30s. I haven't checked it. Like I didn't check it just
Yeah.
recently, but I know it wasn't doing well, right?
It's
And
not
and
great.
that's the
It's not great.
that's the point. This is my out of all the millions of things that you can look at there, that's one I'm going to be hyper focused on. When that
Okay.
one turns positive, I think it's going to be on,
Mm,
right?
okay.
Because and it's probably going to happen on the way up, like the trajectory of it. If
Yeah.
you see it really
Yeah.
start to move, so that's the one that I'm looking at.
Buyer traffic. Got it.
Is buyer traffic because that's the thing, right? I mean, it's all about making money, and if you
So
can't
that's
build a
that's
house
the
and sell
first
it, then why would you
domino that
do it?
falls. Yeah, so that's the first domino that falls is
Right.
buyer traffic, then buyer interest, then purchase, then home builds. Okay, I get it. I get it. Makes perfect
You see
sense.
what I'm getting at?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah,
Buyer
yeah, yeah.
traffic. And that's it. And so once I see that that has moved up, then I know it's going to be on. Like it's only a matter of time before the money starts to flow. Right.
Mm.
And the
Yeah.
people are going to want to jump into the game. And that's all there is to it. And so when they start to do it, this is the problem that they're going to face, right? And this is going to be the exact same problem. I'm going to call it out now, right here, so that you can follow along and say, "Dude, you were wrong," right? And all right, because this is what's going to end up happening if it goes down in a way that has any kind of significance to it, right? Because that's the key. If it's just like,
Yeah. It's
right,
gotta be a big yeah, yeah,
we're
yeah,
not
yeah,
we're
yeah.
not talking the same thing anymore, right? We're talking all of a sudden switched on. Buyers are like, hey, I'm happy, I'm encouraged, I'm ready to go. And you start seeing this moving up, right? This dramatic, I don't even know how much to call it a dramatic, this significant, right?
Yep.
Change in direction for buyer traffic will then have those contractors moving in. This is
Yeah.
the problem. They're going to sign a contract to build a house, but nobody knows how many are going to do that at the right time at the same time,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
When that takes place, it becomes inelastic demand, right?
Almost
Meaning that
instantly.
they
Yeah.
will pay
Yeah.
any price to get the lumber. And if there's not any out there, the price will go up. And that's
Yeah.
all there is to it. And so if this, like you can almost spell it out, right?
Sure.
You can say this has to happen this way. It can't work any other way because once the inelastic demand, like you could say, no, I'm waiting, right? That's one thing. But if you signed a contract says I'm going to be doing this,
Yeah.
then that's it. It's on.
Yeah.
Right.
Love that. Love
So
that.
that's where I'm like this, like with popcorn. I'm like, what is that buyer traffic going to
Yeah.
change? Like, what is going to be the change of that? Because then it's going to
And
be
it can
on.
change
You
quick.
know,
I mean, buyer traffic, right?
there.
The consumer I've studied for 30 years, you could switch them on. I mean, and oh, by the way, let's not forget the government, it can stick their hands in here too, right? President Trump comes out with some kind of housing emergency incentive program. Bam, on,
Oh yeah.
right?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's all really. If you can't tell me that there isn't money out there. There's plenty of money, and it's all over the place. It's not like there isn't an abundance of money right now. It's all about the feelings and perceptions that people have. They are completely terrified,
Yeah.
right? I
Agreed.
mean, just they're scared to the core. And
Yep.
it's amazing as like, as I have developed, well, we don't have time to get into it, but as I have developed the credible threat theory, I look out there at what is being projected out there on the mainstream media as
Hmm.
literally monetary policy. Everything. Like not just the monetary
Yeah.
policy, but everything that is being spoken is part of the monetary policy now because people have a reaction with their money, right?
Hmm.
And what they do with their money is incredibly important to how it is that the Federal Reserve needs to conduct themselves. And a lot of this has to do with elevated inflation expectations. And by breaking the supply chain and keeping that supply chain broken, whether it's through COVID lockdowns or credible threats of tariffs or whatever it is that's going on out there, you can keep that elevated inflation expectations. And that being the key to the monetary policy, when I look out there and I see what is happening right now, I don't think about it in a way of failure. I think about it in a way that succeeded for the Federal Reserve, and
Mm.
I don't like it. Like I'm even wearing the hat and the Fed hat, right? I mean, I'm not big into the whole idea of central banking and all the other stuff around it, but to also understand that there is economic forces out there that if we were to have a gold standard, you would find pain and misery for the majority of the people almost
For
instantaneously, and it
sure.
would not be a good thing. It's much better to understand what is taking place right now so that you can take advantage of it. Now, it's funny to think that the central banking system literally creates the ability for people to then separate themselves from everybody else in a way
Yeah.
of mass proportions. And nobody really seems to take full advantage of it. In fact, most people look at it as a horrible, evil thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when I
Again,
think
don't hate the
about
player, hate the game. Yeah.
right. It's not. It's like even the idea of ending the Fed. I don't like the idea of ending the central banking system, but I don't like the idea of the central banking system. So, weird paradox to be in, right?
Yeah, it's kind of a
Now,
weird one.
it's not a
Yeah.
matter of what I like or dislike.
It
It's
is
not, it
what it
doesn't
is.
matter
Yeah.
what I like or
It's there.
dislike. It is I gotta figure out what is happening right now so I can best position myself for it, and I
Amen.
can't change anything about the external.
Love it.
Right? So,
Love it. Well, let's ask one more question from the chat, and then we'll go to
yeah.
Jim after this one. Basically, the question from Jen is: do you see QE and the money printers getting turned on? You see the Fed in a rate cutting cycle. Do you think QE and the money printer go burr is about to start up again?
No.
Oh,
Um,
okay,
I don't necessarily see the idea of balance sheet expansion.
okay, I like it.
The ending of the unwinding of the balance sheet has already had a significant
Sure.
impact on the mortgage market,
Yep.
and they haven't done it yet,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just the
They're just
idea
talked
of
about
it.
it. Yeah.
Right. So here's the thing about like the idea of what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to do has far more impact than the Federal Reserve's action,
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. I agree.
right?
Yep.
Far more. And they've developed the way of communicating this out there to the mainstream media or through the mainstream media to the markets so that no matter what situation they are in, the deployment of the information can either have an easing or tightening effect.
Hmm.
It doesn't really necessarily matter the move, but
Right.
how they talked about it, right?
Agreed.
And
Hmm.
so learning more and more about how it is that they conduct this particular monetary policy, balance sheet expansion was used at the lower bound of zero,
Hmm. Correct.
right? That means it would have to be a drop to zero for them to really fire up QE. In my opinion, like they could do
Right.
QE at any point, but like they would really have to have
Yeah,
interest rates at
they
zero.
would do rates first, right?
Right.
To your point. Yeah.
Right. So rates would go to zero for them to fire up QE. Now, the reason why they had QE to begin with was because they were operating in a very low neutral interest rate environment, meaning the neutral interest rate was very close to zero. And when they took interest rates to the lower bound of zero, it didn't have a stimulating effect, right? It failed
Hmm.
them. They knew that was going to happen, and that's why they had the quantitative easing programs and the forward guidance with the promise to keep interest rates at zero for a prolonged period of time, along with this massive expansion of the balance sheet of 850 billion to $4.5 trillion, right? This created a somewhat of an inflationary scenario that didn't quite work out well enough for them.
Yeah.
All right. It just didn't quite do it. And although people will argue the fact, that's fine. We can argue it all day long. It just didn't work for the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy. And so now they were in a situation in which that they were desperate, absolutely desperate to try and find some sort of inflationary scenario in order to get off the lower bound of zero. This
Yeah.
was their major problem. They had no room for stimulating the economy with interest rate adjustments. They hadn't had it since the great financial crisis, and they were like begging for it again. Right. And now
Yeah.
the main thing that they needed was elevated inflation and inflation expectation. And when I talk about this, people think, oh, well, they did COVID on purpose then, huh? Conspiracy theorist, and I'm like, oh, good Lord. Okay. Well, whatever. They had something called the makeup strategy, right?
Yep.
So this makeup strategy was going to intend to let inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time. They had a way of deploying information through mainstream media articles, through social media, through music videos, through speeches and documents and talking. And they even talked about it in a way that said, hey, we have to focus in on people who may not even know what the hell the Federal Reserve is or what inflation is, and we have to communicate this information to them as well, right? So they had this whole makeup strategy to push elevated inflation expectations. Now, I know this is kind of rambling sounding, but this is important to understand because now with the elevated inflation expectation, what they have done is something very awesome for their monetary policy is that they took that neutral interest rate, which was the rate that was neither accommodating nor restricting the economy, and they've started to pull that thing upward.
Yep.
Now, just recently in Jerome Powell's speech, he talked about how the neutral interest rate is somewhere around 100 basis points higher than it was last year. And this is another sign that the credible threats of tariffs were working. Now, Myron, the newest Fed governor, their voting member to the FOMC, said quite the opposite in that the neutral interest rate was falling. This is, again, part of the way that the Fed operates in that many governors and officials come out and disagree with each other to
Mm-hmm.
create the open-endedness for the
Yeah.
understanding of what has taken place with their monetary policy. That way their words are more powerful when they deliver them, right? So as people are
Mm-hmm.
confused, when they come out with a very certain statement, it has a very profound impact on the economy. So now understanding that the neutral interest rate has risen, their monetary policy is how close can we get the Fed funds rate to neutral? Can we
Mm-hmm.
raise neutral up to the Fed funds rate, or do we have to lower the Fed funds rate to neutral? As people are growing accustomed to the idea of tariffs, I think the neutral interest rate is probably going to peak out if it hasn't started to fall, right? I
Right.
mean, who knows? Maybe it came down with the lowering of inflation expectations, right?
Maybe. Yeah.
So nobody can really see where the neutral interest rate is. And now knowing that there is a neutral interest rate out there somewhere and that the Fed is focused in on it, and now where they need to go in order to be at neutral, whether or not the future says, hey, man, we've got fear of inflation coming, or if they lower it to that neutral interest rate, neither one of those things really involve quantitative easing.
Yeah. Got it. Like it.
All right.
All right,
So
Jim, you got your
no,
hands up for a
no
long
QE.
time. Yeah, I love it. No, no
Long way to
QE.
get around to no QE.
I like it. Jim, go ahead, ask your question, bud.
I think expanding on the lumber products and stuff, construction materials in general are very volatile and hard to find. I've got projects where I'm having to go to 3, 4 different stores to get the projects I need or the products I need. So if you're not pre-planning your job, if it's a year-long project, you better pre-plan and pre-order everything because you can have a 15, 20% increase and that's going to destroy your product or your
Yeah.
project.
Amen.
I'm running into that right now. So just heavily recommend people pre-plan, pre-order, pre-buy your material. Don't go too far though, because if you get the wrong thing and have to do a shift, then you're going to be sitting on product.
Yeah. Like it.
So it's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, Simon, you got buddies in the industry. What are you seeing outside of lumber? We're talking windows and other stuff. What are you seeing in the other parts of the housing market?
Well, there's kind of an interesting way. Let's just take Windows, for example. So like Windows increased in price and they didn't come down in price, and so they were expensive. And they were also pushed out a long way. So, like for example, a vinyl window at one time for me, I would get in 10 days. Right? And then during COVID pandemic and the shutdowns and all the other stuff, it got pushed out to like it was horrible. It was like 60 days or something like that. It was horrible.
Wow.
And so when I think about the timeline on those windows, right? Like they had come down somewhat.
Hmm.
And when they get down to like they were down at one point, like I could get them in like say 2 to 3 weeks. They're getting pushed back out to 30 days. And so
Mm.
when I think about like maybe what is happening, is there layoffs taking place within the industry or, some kind of slowdown or whatever that's causing this to take place? Time is money, right? And so absolutely, like if you have to, if you don't order the window, like there was a time when, you could say, hey man, I'm almost done with the framing, come
Hmm.
out and measure, order my windows. Well, now you have to order the windows before you even start framing, right? And
Yeah.
make sure that you do the openings accurately or do the order accurate, one or the other. And so, but and when you think about it in this fashion, it was just like people who had a logistics where they would order windows when they were framing have to change the way that they conduct their business, just like like what was being said there in order to have those windows, keep the project going because it's all about keeping the project flowing, right?
Correct.
Always the flow of material to the project in a steady way so that it's a constant putting together, right? With never
Hmm.
delays, or as few
Yep.
delays as possible.
Yep.
And being like, being on the supply side of things, like I don't see a problem like a lot of other people see with building materials. And I don't,
Okay.
and I'm not sure exactly, what it is that's out there that seems to be like delaying other people out there because I've heard about it being like an issue. Maybe it's because of the products that I'm selling are just simpler, like they're like this fiber cement sidings, typical cedar siding, I don't know, just typical plywoods.
Yeah.
I don't sell anything that's really like extraordinary, fancy, or luxury. It's just basic building materials.
Got it.
But I haven't had other than maybe like a little bit of delay in some building materials like the lumber being gapped, in the inventory gaps, and then maybe a little bit of lead times come into things like windows. I don't really see problems
Mm.
in the industry like I had. Right.
Okay.
Now, is it free flowing like it was prior to COVID? No,
No.
not even
No.
close. Like it is stumbles, it hiccups, it's very difficult operation comparatively. But to me, it does seem to flow
Okay.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it. We got a question from Jeff that I've always wanted to ask you, and actually, I don't think I have. So shout out Jeff for this one. What kind of macroeconomic metrics do you look at weekly, monthly? Like, what are the big ones for you? You already talked about buyer traffic being one you're focused on, but what are some other ones?
Um, I I don't know if I really have like a particular metric that I'm looking at.
Okay.
Um,
Like, do you look at
like
unemployment
kind of
claims or job markets or CPI or anything?
no, but and here's the issue that I have with a lot of numbers out there is that I don't know if you guys are familiar with FASB 56, right?
Tell
But
us. Yeah.
FASB 56, it's like the financial accountability
Mm,
statistics,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
something. I don't know what it is. I to be honest, I'm making that up. FASB 56, FASAB 56. If you look it up, this is I did a video on this. It was one of the earliest videos I had done on my channel. But essentially, this is the government telling the people that they will lie about the numbers for national security reasons. But the numbers are good enough to do your investments and do your things with, and it's accurate enough for that, but it may not necessarily be the real numbers because of the national security reasons behind it all. So
Mm,
now when I read that, I'm like, you can't do that to me, bro. Like,
come
you can't tell me
on.
that the number may be fake and then expect me to believe it good enough. Right. Like,
Right.
I'm just not
Yeah.
going to do it. Right. So now I'm going to be like, the little detective and say, okay, well, I'm going to look around everything but the number. Right.
Right.
So when I think about the numbers, I think about the direction in which that they are headed and by how much, because I think that has a little bit more accuracy to it than
Okay.
necessarily the
Yeah.
number itself.
It's the
Because
direction or the trend. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right, and I think that they also like we had recently, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but basically if you put a goal around a number, then the environment will begin to change in order to create the number goal, right?
Huh, okay.
So if you're trying to create like a particular environment in which that, you get like, your sales up to this particular, well, you'll start hurting other parts of the business just in order to create the sales number that where you need it at, right? And so to kind of understand it in this fashion is that there's a manipulation that begins to take place the moment that you create a goal, right? A
Mhm.
number that needs to be this. And so as I start to think about those, I have a tendency to kind of disassociate the numbers themselves as opposed to like using them as the critical information.
Got it.
And so like, like I look at the US 10-year treasury and I'm thinking, wow, interest rates are going down, right? Because the US 10-year treasury has been
Yep.
dropping. But like, whether or not the 4% is significant or anything anymore, I don't I don't know how to incorporate that into the idea because that may not be the accuracy of what it is that we're even viewing out there. But I
Got
think
it.
the direction that it's headed is accurate.
Yeah.
Same thing with the unemployment numbers. I mean, here you got historically low unemployment. Well, I doubt that, right?
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
and so and so doubting it makes it very difficult to then say, okay, this number is accurate. Now, I do use that number in the sense that that's what the Federal Reserve is looking at, right? So if you're going to try and understand the monetary policy, you have to understand that that's what they believe, right, for their
Yep.
monetary policy. So again, like, whether or not I believe it or use that for my information, it's just more part of like just part of the bigger understanding of how it all goes down. Um, I don't think it's so simple as like being able to spell it out. This is how it works. I think literally every single person has developed their own personal economy that is very unique to them.
Yep.
And how it is that things take place within the broader macroeconomics and how that affects you is really based on your belief system and how it is that you have conducted yourself your entire life. Like if you are hyper focused, like super focused on political environment, and you have based your entire life around it, things that happen in politics really affect you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But if you make them irrelevant in your life and you choose to live that way, like I am positioning myself in a way that says, even if they were to do that and it does impact my life, it doesn't hurt because I'm expecting it from them anyway, right?
Right.
All of
Hmm.
a sudden you have a whole different world that you live in. Right, that is so different from the person who is just so like, no, look what they did, look what they're doing to you, And I'm thinking, well, no, they're doing that to you, right? Because of how you position yourself, because
That's
of that,
funny. That's funny. That's funny. Well, one
right?
last question. I could go with you for hours and hours. One last question.
I love talking.
Recession or not in the next 12 months?
No, I don't think so. What's the worst part of a recession? All right,
Job
everybody,
losses?
job losses. It's the worst, right?
Right.
That's the worst part of a recession is job losses. Now, something that I found very interesting about the jobs market now is that the Federal Reserve used to be very concerned about a hot jobs market,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
See, they
wage
used to be really
inflation.
concerned
Yeah.
about because it would cause inflation. That's right,
Yep.
right?
Hmm.
But now they like inflation, right? Their problem was right, and so they don't worry about inflation as much as they used to. And so even the Phillips curve and all that other stuff has been proven not to necessarily be functioning and providing the same reality to the situation like it once had. Like even the Psalm rule, like I loved the Psalm rule.
Yeah.
It was
Claudia
so
Som's
accurate.
awesome. I've interviewed her a couple of times. Yeah, she's
Yeah,
really
I
good.
know. And I watched that interview and it was awesome. Right. It was, I absolutely love it, but it broke down. It didn't work.
No, yeah, she admitted it too. Yeah. She's like, didn't work. Not this
Yeah.
time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's because there's something different about the way that the Federal Reserve is looking at employment and how it all creates the
Yeah.
monetary policy for them. They can let their jobs market run as hard as they want.
Okay.
It will not do the inflation.
Hmm.
So running full employment from now on is the goal, right?
Got it.
Unemployment falling or getting to a point that would then force the Federal Reserve to do something, I don't think the Fed will ever allow it to even get to that point to begin with.
Okay.
Right? And so at this point, allowing jobs to like, I mean, you think about it, although it's weakening, like the labor market is weakening, we still like if you pull up a chart of unemployment over history, it's low, right?
Oh yeah.
Unemployment is low comparatively.
4.4 is, yeah. I mean,
Right.
dude, when I was going to school, full employment was 7%.
Yeah, right. Like
Seriously,
I
when I got
remember
my degree, yeah.
I remember going to get my first job and I was in competition against, 20 men out there who
Mm,
were like all experienced. I'm trying to get a job at a lumber yard,
right. Yeah.
Um, and so when I think about how it is that the Federal Reserve conducts themselves with the inflationary scenario, there was a time when they would try to create jobs and then remove jobs from the economy to balance out the inflation. And that's not the case anymore,
Mm,
right? So now you can have run a hot jobs market as much as you want. It doesn't create the inflation that they would be looking for. What creates the inflation, or at least through the idea of consumption, is really more geared at the top 20% since they're doing most of the consumption anyway. So
got
you
it.
can run the hot jobs market, they can get all this money, they can be working real hard, but they don't really participate in the way that they had used to do it, right? So creating a recessionary environment to deal with an inflationary pressure is no longer the way that the Federal Reserve is going to do it. So like my
Mm,
idea that there is going to be like less of a problem with the jobs market than people would anticipate, right? And that's where the recession is the worst, is when people lose their jobs.
yep.
So what if you don't really lose your job,
Hmm.
right? See, like even during the COVID pandemic, here we had like all these zombie corporations gorging on all this cheap credit, hiring all these people, and it eliminated the service industry of workers.
Yeah.
But then what happened, right? All these zombie corporations started to fail. Well, instead of getting bailed out in order to save the jobs market, all those laid off workers had to go to work at the service industry. Now, it's not a great job, but it's a job. And if it's a job, you're not unemployed,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
so that's the difference inside of it. It was just like all of a sudden, which would typically have been a recessionary event when people lose their jobs from all these layoffs, found work at the service industry. So there's all your employment right there.
Got
Go to
it.
work. Right. And even though they're like, this sucks, yeah, you're right, it does. Right. But that's unfortunate. And that's the situation that we're now in.
Yep.
So I look at things much differently now in that we essentially have recessionless recessions, right?
Hmm.
Where their job losses will take place, but it doesn't necessarily raise the unemployment. Right. And you got zombie corporations that will fail and they don't necessarily get bailed out by the government. Right. And so,
Mm-hmm.
how is it that this actually takes place? Well, they bailed out the corporations back during COVID when you had things like the special purpose vehicles that were
Mm-hmm.
set up to buy corporate debt. Now, they didn't even hardly buy any corporate debt,
Yeah.
right?
Just the
But the
threat of doing it. Yeah.
establishment,
Yeah.
yeah, the establishment of the facility itself brought in all this market participation, believing that the Federal Reserve was going to be buying into it and they would front run
Mm.
them essentially. Right? They
There you go.
gave all these corporations all the money they needed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially the market itself bailed out the corporations through the credible threat of the special purpose vehicle.
Yep.
Right? And
Love it.
these are the type of tactics that they now use. So recessions, I don't think are going to exist like we once understood them.
Okay. All
Right?
right. I love that. Very cool. Well, Simon, you are amazing. Thank you for this hour conversation. Thank you for being part of or helping with school. Thank you for coming back
Yeah.
to Vegas for year 3. Just remind people, what is your YouTube channel?
Uneducated economist. So just real simple, uneducated economist. If you want to send me an email, uneducatedeconomist@gmail. I'm on all the other social media platforms, but essentially I'm just active on YouTube because that's the place I'm active. That's my spot. So
There you go, Simon. Thanks again. Have a great week. You are amazing. Later.
thank
Bye,
you very
everybody.
much, Mike. I appreciate it. See ya.